head to Scotland Yard, our national reporter Charlie Peters is there for us. And it does seem that there's a lot of political pressure, Charlie, to make sure that the police are still on a very strong footing this weekend. And let's be honest, a lot of them must be exhausted by now.
Hi, good morning, Stephen. Yes, absolutely exhausted after 12 days of violent disorder across much of England and pockets of Northern Ireland. And with the mutual aid system, many of those forces will have been supporting areas far from their homes, thinking very keenly, of course, of the police officers' welfare. Many of them have been dragged hundreds of miles away to support officers and those facing disorder across the country. Well, the policing minister, Dame Diana Johnson, said on Thursday morning, after the last big set of demonstrations, that she was cautiously optimistic but did have further intelligence about upcoming protests. Today we do have some so-called anti-racist, anti-fascist protests taking place in London, but also in Birmingham, Manchester and Edinburgh. That's being organised by the Stand Up to Racism Committee. We also heard yesterday from a Cabinet Office Minister, Nick Thomas-Symonds, who was cautioning against politicians encouraging demonstrations, because after those big scenes on Wednesday night where tens of thousands took to the streets to oppose rumours of right-wing disorder taking place outside of immigration solicitors' establishments, those right-wing protests never materialised, but the police still had to respond significantly to public order concerns, to significant groups, which has strained resources further. And I think in the morning after that, the head of the Met, Sir Mark Rowley, said that this was a show of unity from the community. But then we've had him essentially quietly being rebuked by that Cabinet Office Minister, saying that we shouldn't be praising these demonstrations or encouraging them, because that's going to add to the strain for policing. It's bad enough dealing with one side, especially a side that is easily being whipped up into violent disorder, but it becomes additionally difficult for the police when they're dealing with an opposition set of protesters. But there are more protest sets for today, as I said, predominantly on the anti-fascist side, but the policing minister says there is intelligence of upcoming other protests. That's not clear on what they could be. At the same time, the policing response and the legal response has been robust. Hundreds arrested, of those hundreds also charged, dozens receiving stiff prison sentences already. However, yesterday the Ministry of Justice did confirm that many of those recently sentenced for violent disorder or whipping up racial hatred online could be released early under a new scheme brought in by the government to free up prison spaces.
Wow, that is amazing, isn't it? Charlie, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, it's just... I do think it's very odd that Sir Mark Rowley commended and almost seemed to encourage the anti-protest protests.
Yes.
When we see it was even at one of those protests, of course, that we've seen this Labour councillor arrested and then charged for his
saying the most
comments.
hateful things.
And then we do know, which has been reported, that some other protests there was, from the river to the sea, anti-Semitic chanting going on at these as well.
So the anti-protest protests aren't all. Some of them may be peaceful. Not all of them are.
Well, even if they're peaceful, it's no good if you're chanting what is in effect hate stuff. And I know that's not the majority of people, it's the small minority, but that applies to the other side as well. It's the small minority creating the problems.
But could you not argue as well that just turning out, even if you do nothing, just turning out now, you're part of the problem, because there's a tinderbox out there.
Yeah.
Yes, you've got the right. Of course, you've got the right to protest. But if you do at the moment, aren't you just sort of contributing to the unease? Yeah,
well, maybe you are, but then don't you, if you want to have your voice heard, if you feel it's not being heard on whichever side of the argument you fall...
But maybe now is not the time. Just while things are so heated.
Well,
I don't know. I don't know the answer to it, but...
I think there's a lack of recognition as to how angry people are about what is going on in their communities. Whether it's serious stuff, which you know what we're talking about, or whether it's even things like, you just don't feel like you recognise your high street anymore.
Yeah.
Which some may say, well, you've got to get used to all of that. Maybe we do. But maybe you could say, well, I don't like it. I don't think it...
And maybe you resent the politicians living in their little Westminster bubble as many do. You don't feel that they understand your problems at all.
I think it's that very difficult territory, isn't it, when you can say, you know, I walk down the street and no one's speaking English, and if you voice concern over that, someone says, well, you're being racist. Well, actually, it's not... Someone who is racist could say that, but I don't think it's racist to say it. No. I think you're just saying, well, my community's changing, and I've had no say in any of that. And that's... Whether you agree with it or not, it's a valid concern to be listened to and therefore needs to be addressed, even if it doesn't stop it. Does that make sense?
Yes, totally. A vote for you.
Because it's so difficult to talk about without people then jumping on.
It is very, very dangerous to talk about anything.
You should see some of the stuff I get on Twitter at the minute is awful from people who reckon they're peace-loving, let's welcome all, and it's all about love and peace, and then they send you some of the most abusive messages.
Yeah, I know.